Hello, and welcome to Change the Face of Yoga, teaching toddlers through golden oldies. I'm very excited to be talking to lots of yoga teachers who will explain their passion for teaching yoga to students with different ages, physical fitness levels, wellness levels, and different goals. They will explain the benefits of yoga for these students and will be including teacher tips and pose modifications. I am Stephanie Cunningham of Yoga Lightness, and I've been teaching over 50s for 10 years. So this area is my passion and the passion of many other yoga teachers that you will be listening to in this series. Thank you so much for listening, and let's get started. This is episode 118 of Changing the Face of Yoga, and my guest today is Gina McCauley. And Gina has graciously agreed to be part of my meditation theme. And she has taken training and is an IRest meditation teacher. So we're going to discuss IRest, but let's get a little bit about Gina. She began as a student in the late 80s, and she's been teaching since 2009. She feels there's no one style for everyone, and that she offers different things for different people so that they can take what they need. She has an advanced diploma in yoga teaching through the Academy of Yoga Learning, a graduate certificate in yoga therapy through the Australian Institute of Yoga Therapy, and is a certified IRest Yoga Nidra teacher. She's on the faculty of the Academy of Yoga Learning and Australian Institute of Yoga Therapy. And she runs her own teacher training. And she has undertaken studies with Indian teachers A.G. and Indra Mohan and Saraswathi Vasudevan. I hope I said that right. She's a senior registered teacher with Yoga Australia and has served on the Yoga Australia Victorian Committee. She is continually studying and practicing yoga and is currently inspired by Lee Blashki, Paul Wooden, and Richard Miller. Welcome, Gina. I'm so glad that you agreed to come on and talk about this. And is there anything you would like to add to that?
Oh, well, thanks, Stephanie. Thanks for inviting me. When you string it all together like that, it sounds bigger than how it actually feels. But no, I have nothing to add to that.
Okay, all right. It's still an impressive list.
Oh, well, it makes me feel a little bit more important and impressive than what I actually am. I'm just like everybody doing their own thing to the best of their ability. So as I go through that, I do bits of training here and there that support where I'm at. So when you string it together, it sounds like it does sound impressive.
Well, good. I'm glad. Okay, well, we're going to talk about IRest, and I think it'd be good. I'm sure almost everyone has probably heard of it, but it'd probably be good just to give a little background about it and maybe what makes it a bit different from other types of meditation.
Yeah, yep. So IRest is Yoga Nidra, basically. It was developed by Dr. Richard Miller, and Richard tells how he rocked up to a yoga class to meet people, and Yoga Nidra was part of that class. He was trying to fit into a community, and it turned out that this little class that he was going to was silent, so he didn't actually get to meet any other people, but he got to meet himself. It's a little story that he tells through Yoga Nidra. And he knew that Yoga Nidra was the method for him. He just really had a deep connection to it in that first instant. And so over the years, he started practicing it and eventually started teaching it. And really, that was really his thing. And through students and through other people, he was teaching Yoga Nidra to, ex-servicemen. And they were going back to their peers and saying how much they were getting benefit from this practice of Yoga Nidra. And eventually the military approached him and said, "Oh, we've been hearing about this thing you're doing, and we'd really love to, and the results you're getting, and we'd really love to see how it works and do some studies and see if it would support other veterans." And so he started this research program in the military, but they said to him, you can't call it Yoga Nidra. You can't call it yoga because, we're the military. We can't do yoga.
Right.
So he spent some time trying to work out, what can I call this thing? What is it? And what he came up with was essentially what they're doing is, or what he was doing was integrative restoration. So really, and that's what Yoga Nidra is, it's restoring and reintegrating ourselves to our fullness, our wholeness. And as everything was everything, he decided to call it IRest. And the military loved it. They loved it. They thought that was great. They did their studies and they were, quite successful. And they said, we love this. We want to make this part of, an option for returned servicemen when they come back to help support them with pain and PTSD, etc. And they said, you can call it anything you like. We love it so much. You can call it whatever you like. So then Richard, now it's, IRest Yoga Nidra is what we call it, or IRest Yoga Nidra meditation. But essentially, Yoga Nidra is meditation. And I love it too. What I love about it is it is a beautifully gentle form of meditation. So it's not forcing the body into some position that isn't quite right. And, not everybody, as you would know with, the people that you've been speaking to, sometimes it's certain things that are available for people. Sitting still with your legs crossed on a cushion is not available to a lot of people. So are we saying that you can't do meditation if you can't sit like that? One of the things I love about Yoga Nidra is that you can do it anywhere, anytime, any position, any way you like, sitting, standing, lying, walking. And it's so beautiful and restorative. And I think personally meditation should be about that, restoring, reintegrating, that kind of restorative kind of practice of coming back to your wholeness.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things that Yoga Nidra does that helps in that journey is, as your people might know, is that it is within this framework of the Pancha Maya Kosha, so the 5 layers or shields that veil our true nature, essentially. So Yoga Nidra takes us through these 5 layers, which are the physical body, the energy body or the breath layer, the mind, or the mind that processes that kind of information from our senses, where feelings and emotions kind of sit, the deeper wisdom mind that is, that place where we have the wisdom and the aha moments, but it's also the part of the mind where we hold our habitual patterning, and this joy or bliss layer that covers all of those 5 layers, cover our true nature. So, the process of Yoga Nidra, any Yoga Nidra, takes us through these 5 layers to help us reconnect back into our wholeness. To be able to have this study, though, Richard had to be very clear about a protocol. So, for studies, you have to have a clear protocol to prove your point, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
And so he developed some very clear process, or this 10-step process through that includes the journey through the koshas to come to your wholeness. And it is through this model that the IRest protocol has been developed, and it's very specifically taught and trained. So shall I keep going on about that, or did you want to ask?
No, that's great. I didn't realize all this. It's the first time I've noticed that IRest has Yoga Nidra after it. So I guess so it's really fascinating to me. I'm just putting down the cough so that I'll know where to go when I edit. There we go. All right, go ahead. No, I would continue. I think it's very interesting.
Yeah, great. Okay, so that's a great point about not realizing that Yoga Nidra is IRest.
Yeah.
One of the things about with Yoga Nidra is it has those elements of it. And if you think about a traditional Yoga Nidra, we We do our sankalpa at the start, which has this, clarifying our intentions and our sankalpa, our mission or our dharma, if you like. It has generally an instruction from the teacher that asks us to, maybe set an intention to remain aware and awake. It talks us through a body scan. Usually every Yoga Nidra has this lovely body scan associated with it, and then some kind of breathing practice, like a breath counting practice. And then feelings. It goes through feelings generally of something like heavy or light, hot or cold. And then in a traditional Yoga Nidra, you might go into something like a visualization, which is when we're working on those deeper layers of the mind. But one of the things with visualizations that can be problematic is certain types of trauma. So a lot of the visualizations, they might be walking through a forest or in a garden or in the ocean or about water, and there's all these different kinds of associations that can actually be a little bit triggering for some people. So the IRest protocol has a very specific process through that area where we don't so much do the visualizations. There are definitely some that can, but generally we're looking at the functioning of the mind in terms of emotions and thoughts and our long-held beliefs, and we work with opposites as you do in Yoga Nidra. Mm-hmm. And then we come out through the process, same as you would in a normal Yoga Nidra, through the intention and I guess your sankalpa and that kind of reintegration. But to make it really specific to train and to have a specific protocol, we kind of take out that potential trauma issue that could be triggering for some people, and we add this more specific work with our emotions and with our thoughts. So really looking at our, I guess, deep held thoughts and beliefs about ourselves and about the world, and seeing if there can be an alternative or an opposite to that can help us to break free of some of that pattern conditioning.
Okay.
It's often part of our issues when dealing with emotions and things. Our conditioning can really get in the way of that. So it's a lovely way to help break free of that.
All right.
And as I said, it's very gentle. When we go through the whole relaxation process, the body scan, we're interested in people sensing what's going on in the body, reintegrating to a felt sense of themselves, that somatic sense of themselves, which we often come away from. We kind of tend to not listen to our messages from our body.
True, especially if trauma is involved. So, yeah. Obviously, since the military liked it, there must have been a positive result from this protocol that he put together. Can you talk a little bit about what that was like? Yeah, so they did. They loved it. I'm just going to tell you a little bit here. This is from the IRest website, and I'm actually just going to read straight from it. Based on the current studies with IRest in the military, the Defence Centres of Excellence has approved IRest as a complementary and alternative medicine, warranting continuing research for its use in the treatment of PTSD. In addition, that's post-traumatic stress disorder. In addition, the US Army Surgeon General has listed Yoga Nidra based on the research with IRest as a tier 1 approach for addressing pain management in military care. IRest has been shown to be effective in scientific trials for conditions including chronic pain, sleep problems, depression, anxiety, and post-traumatic stress. So there's a lot, and then from the IRest website, there's links to a whole heap of studies that have been done on that. Things like IRest meditation for older adults with depression, effectiveness of integrative restoration, or IRest Yoga Nidra on mindfulness, sleep, pain in healthcare workers, restoration or IRest on perceived stress in workers, comparative effectiveness of 3 occupational therapy sleep interventions, randomized controlled studies. There's all kinds of different research. So for people who are really quite interested in that
kind of thing and really getting into the depths of it. There's lots of research now on IRest specifically because of the protocol that helps people to get a handle on its huge benefit.
Great. Okay. Go ahead.
Oh no, I was just going to say, and the training in it, the training is quite extensive to be an IRest teacher. That the training is very extensive, so you need to have a practice of IRest meditation to start with. But we have a level 1 and a level 2 training, and then a certification process. And the level 1 and level 2 are very extensive, intensive, week-long training. It's a huge manual, and I remember when I said I was heading off to do the level 1 IRest training. My students were like, "Oh, yay, a week of IRest," and I kind of thought the same myself for a while. And when I got there, it was like, "Oh my gosh, this is really full on. It's very extensive," and it was great. But it was a full-on training program, which I wasn't quite expecting. So I didn't get to spend a whole week of IRest.
No, it doesn't sound quite relaxing. Yeah. Did you do it in the States?
Pardon?
Did you go to the States for it, or was it here in Australia?
No. I was so lucky that I got to do my level 2 and level 1 IRest training with Richard out here. I think he's only offered the training himself once, and I was just fortunate enough to be able to be on both of those courses. But he does, so he doesn't do the training in Australia anymore. But we do still have people. We have quite a few people in Australia now who can do the training, and we do have training in Australia in most of the cities, capital cities. Fuko Toyota is our senior IRest trainer in Australia, and she's in not Brisbane. I think she's on the Gold Coast. To be honest, I'm not 100% sure, but I think she's on the Gold Coast. And so she offers trainings. Lee Blashki also assists and offers trainings in IRest level 1 and 2 as well. And the certification process is done through a supervisor and a mentor, and that's a self-paced 2-year program of extensive study and in-depth training and study. Yeah. So that was done. My mentor here was Fuko here in Australia, but when you sign up for certification, you could get a mentor from anywhere around the world, a supervisor from anywhere around the world. So, yeah.
Great. Yeah. I used to teach seniors, and I would always do a Yoga Nidra at the end. And I found what you said about the visualizations, that I stopped saying what you had to do. I picked an emotion and say, find some place where you feel happiness, or where you feel calmness, or where you feel joy or something. And then they would pick the environment, because some people say, "Oh no, I don't want to go to the beach," or "I hate that," or "I don't want to be on a mountaintop," or I don't want to do any of that. And I thought, okay, I guess we better back off on that one.
No, exactly. You're exactly right. And one of the parts, the early parts of the protocol, is this thing called your inner resource. And for me personally, that has been the most powerful part of this practice. And basically, it's exactly what you've just said. It's giving people, our participants, our students, the opportunity to develop in themselves their own kind of special place, their own favourite place that they like to, go to feel safe and secure. And we encourage them to use their own memory, their own kind of imagination. So, if they don't like mountaintops and prefer, babbling brooks, then they can go for that. But we encourage them through a process of a kind of questioning and interviewing to come up with something that really, really touches them internally. And the essence of our inner resource is not so much the memory. So we might think of something that made us feel, really beautifully safe and peaceful and have a sense of well-being. But what we're actually interested in is when we bring that memory to our mind, how does it make us feel? And that is essentially what our inner resource is. So to my mind with that, you can be feeding into your inner resource just about anything that you come across that gives you that little sense of, oh, that's beautiful, or, oh, that makes me feel so nice, or isn't that lovely, or I feel really safe in this space, or I feel really peaceful here. So we can feed that into our inner resource. Sometimes for me, the simplest thing to really help me trigger that inner resource and really bring it forward is quite simple things. They're not the great big grand things that I might have achieved. It's when I take that first sip of tea in the morning and you get that, or for your coffee, or for your listeners, like whatever that might be, that you get that sense of, thank God I've got my cuppa here.
Yes.
Or, you get home and the dog's so excited to see you and just, turns himself inside out because he's so excited. Or, that cuddle you might get from a newborn or or your partner or a child, that it's like, this is so lovely. That feeling of I'm home or I'm here or this is just right. There's nothing else. Then we kind of realize that really is our deepest kind of truth. And that is where we invite people to, kind of wrangle those things in and feed them into your inner resource. And the reason we do this is so that in the practice or in any time in your life, when you're feeling a little bit uncomfortable or more than a little bit uncomfortable, you've got this little tool within you that's always in you, that's always available, that you can just tap into and know that there is a part of you that is unchanged, that is safe, that is has this deep sense of well-being and peace and calm, even though your outer circumstances might be in the middle of a hurricane. We can have this kind of sense of deep peace within us. But it's like everything and anything, it takes practice to cultivate it. So as we cultivate that in the practice of IRest, we then have access to it more readily out in the world when we really need it.
Yes, I think that's a great point that, first of all, it takes practice, and I agree with that. Yeah. Secondly, that if you do practice and have that available to you, that's very helpful when you really run into a lot of stress or whatever, anxiety or just a bad day, Some days are great. That's right. Okay. So did you teach Yoga Nidra before you got into IRest?
I did, yeah, and I taught that traditional. When I say traditional, probably what I taught was the Satchidananda flavored Yoga Nidra, which I think is what most people are familiar with in Yoga Nidra. Certainly, where I come from, and in all of my teachers and trainings, that's been that Satchidananda based Yoga Nidra, which is beautiful.
Yeah,
and so yes, I taught that, and I was always uncomfortable as a student in some of the visualizations and some of the associations, and as a teacher when I was teaching it, knowing that there might have been people in the room. I remember once I had this lady who I knew had an experience of almost drowning, and I felt, we were doing this Yoga Nidra, and I got to the visualization part, and I didn't really realize until we were right in the middle of it that there was this element of being in the water and going under the water and, being completely safe and okay under the water. But it just really struck me that would not be comfortable for me if I was in her position to have this kind of water visualization. And it just dawned on me in that moment that, this isn't a one-size-fits-all thing. This, what right do I have to be kind of imposing these things on people that may or may not be useful for them? And I think there's a fine line between it being a challenge and being useful to being a challenge and not being useful. So I don't think we can really judge that. So when I came across IRest, and that I discovered that through Lee Blashki, I was just, this is so great, because actually it gives people in the practice the option to choose their own. So they can choose their own kind of emotions, or they can choose their own feelings even. You might give them the option of choosing heavy and light, or hot and cold, or comfort, discomfort. And that was really powerful for me. And I really have not taught that visualization-based Yoga Nidra since I've learnt IRest. And the people I teach it to when I started teaching it, lots of comments about how they enjoyed that they didn't have to kind of feel into that visualization if it wasn't what suited them, but that they could kind of set their own framework for it, really. Yeah. That's powerful for people.
It is.
Yeah.
Would you say that's the major difference between what we consider to be a traditional Yoga Nidra, and I'll leave traditional up to each individual, and IRest, or do you think there's other significant differences?
I think there are other significant. I think that is the main difference. There are other significant differences. So in that initial stage, Richard's broken the sankalpa, if you like, down into the three parts. So whereas in the other kind of Yoga Nidra, the teacher might dictate what the intention is. So you might say and repeat to yourself, "I am practicing Yoga Nidra and I will remain aware and awake." That's kind of a common one that I would hear a lot and I would use a lot myself. And then I would invite them to their own sankalpa. But what Richard's done is broken that down into three. So he gives the student the option to set their own intention. So their intention might be to remain aware and awake, absolutely. But it might be to, one of the things I often say is, if you're here and you are exhausted and this is the only hour you have to yourself for the whole week and you need to rest, set your intention to rest deeply. There is nothing wrong with that, having that deep rest. So, that might be to rest deeply. It might be to rest deeply while remaining aware and awake. It might be to explore a particular part of the practice, maybe using the safe boundaries of the practice to experience a particular emotion that keeps arising. Might be a great intention. It might, and so then you might move into their own very specific sankalpa. So we would probably call that in the practice, it might be called your heartfelt longing or your heartfelt desire. But it's really that big picture intention of how you see yourself out in the world. What is the world asking of you? That kind of much bigger intention. So that's your sankalpa or your dharma, your life purpose. That fits into that kind of second part of the heartfelt mission or heartfelt desire. And the third part is this that I talked about earlier, the inner resource. So we start there. We have that kind of initial relaxation phase, but then we go through this three-part sankalpa, if you like, the intention, the heartfelt desire, and the inner resource that set this firm foundation for safety within the boundaries of the practice, which really give people that sense of security. And I've really found that in myself, that when I've got that foundation, that clear intention and clear inner resource, that the rest of the practice is quite, I was going to say easy. That's not really the right word. You feel quite safe working through the rest of the practice. The other thing is that the practice is pretty much always the same steps. So as a student, you can feel safe knowing that after the inner resource, we're going to do body sensing, then we're doing breath sensing, then we're doing feelings and emotions, then we're doing beliefs, then we're doing joy. And the whole time through the practice, what's woven in is this understanding or beginning to recognize that there is a part of you, a witnessing part of you, that can recognize all of the things that we're experiencing, the sensations, the breathing, the emotions, the thoughts, the joy, that they're all changing, coming and going. And we begin to tap into our deeper awareness, which, if you think of the Pancha Maya Kosha model, is what those 5 veils, 5 sheaths are covering, that true nature, that Atman awareness, whatever you want to call that, whatever your tradition might call that central entity that the 5 koshas are covering. So that's the journey as we take that through to this deep sense of awareness.
Mm. Okay.
And then we come out in a very clear way as well, which is the same back through our we kind of do the little integration practice and back through the intention, the heartfelt desire, and the inner resource to help really anchor it and give it clear bookends. So it's just, and I think that is the real clarity of the practice is in those 10 steps. Whereas, I had never really been trained in, I guess, in another form of Yoga Nidra that was so clear. Like there was lots of freedom I felt in the other forms of Yoga Nidra. And when I look back at that now, probably not much safety for students, not in the way I was teaching it at any rate, because it was always different. It could change. And I didn't really feel like I had that container. Whereas in here, in IRest, I really feel that there's a clear container for holding me as I go through this, process. And it's a real trust in it as well.
Yeah. Because they could feel very vulnerable. I mean, I always had my students close their eyes and just kind of relax and listen. Some laid down, some sat. It was up to them. But I hadn't thought about it in quite that way before, but I think you have a good point. Well, we're almost at the end of the podcast, Gina. Is there anything that you would like to go into with more depth, or something we haven't talked about at all that you would like the listeners to know?
I think the only thing that I would add is if this is interesting to anybody, teachers or students alike, to have a look on the IRest website, because all of the anybody who's done the IRest training is on the IRest website. So you can find a teacher in your local area. And if you are a yoga teacher or even a psychologist, lots of psychologists do this IRest training as well. I'd recommend seeking out a teacher who is teaching the student course. So there's a 6-week course that students can do just to begin to learn about IRest for themselves. And then if that interests them, then source some level 1 training to see if they want to kind of go down that path. But that's the pathway. Anybody who's interested, strongly recommend you have a fully trained IRest teacher. So it can be in level 1, 2, or 3, or level 1, 2, or certified. But just make sure you have an IRest trained teacher to take you through the process. It's beautiful. You wouldn't regret it.
Okay. Do you teach it as part of a class, or is it a separate meeting, shall we say? I mean, you come to just do IRest.
Both. I do both. So
okay.
I have one class a week where it's a gentle / Yoga Nidra class, and we do gentle yoga and we do IRest Yoga Nidra, and we do that every week. I also run the 6-week course periodically at my studio. So they're 90-minute sessions where we go into more detail about the stages of IRest, and then we do an IRest practice focusing on each of the stages over those 6 weeks. The other thing that I do, which I think really works well and I really love, is I also teach a lot of yoga retreats. I love yoga retreats. And on my yoga retreats, I teach the 6-week course in the week retreat. So each day we're focusing on a different part of the IRest protocol, and we're doing a different IRest practice each day on the retreat. And I get lots of great feedback about that as well, that kind of immersive kind of way of learning. And I think that can be really useful. I've just been back 2 weeks back from Fiji, and I had quite a few people on that retreat. I think there was probably about 8 or 9 people who had never done IRest or Yoga Nidra even before, and had such great feedback from them on just this process of getting to know themselves, I guess, essentially is what Yoga Nidra is about, coming back to your wholeness. So it was great. It was great. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, Gina, this has been really fascinating. I have not really had much experience with IRest Yoga Nidra, but I love Yoga Nidra in general. So I think I'll do a little more research on that, see if I can find myself or one of your retreats. I like that idea of just doing it all week. I really do. So thank you so much for coming on and talking to us, the listeners, because you did a really great job, and I think you explained it very well. I think I have a good grasp of what the differences might be.
Great. Thanks so much, Stephanie. It's been great. Thanks for inviting me. And I love talking about IRest, so you chose a topic that I'd love to waffle on about.
Okay. Hey, good. All right. Thank you. Thank you for that wonderful interview. If you would like to be a guest on Changing the Face of Yoga, please go to my website, www.yogalightness.com.au, and under the Changing the Face of Yoga tab, you can complete Be Our Guest form. After reviewing the form and finding it applicable to this podcast, we will send you a link to schedule an interview. Please download, review, and tell your friends of any podcasts that are of interest to you and to them. If you would like to contact me, send an email to info@yogalightness.com.au. And thank you for listening to Changing the Face of Yoga.